or it can be not so good. And I'll tell you the ways that it can be good first. Our faith gives us something to believe in. It gives us something to hope for. Many times tied to faith is forgiveness. And when forgiveness is taught in a healthy way, then we're not weighed down by ruminating over what has happened in the past. And I say in a healthy way because it means you process it. It is not okay that you did that. You process and you think through, and you find a way to release and to make it, and to think about how to make this thing that happened to you that was awful work together for your good. And so you don't just sit in the past all the time when it's done well and when it's done healthy. Now, the flip side is sometimes people who don't understand forgiveness or grace or what have you, may sit with a lot of guilt and just sit with it, and they don't move from it, and that can be unhealthy. People of faith are very hopeful for tomorrow, and when you don't have faith or you don't have something that you're looking forward to, then that can be hindering. As it relates to the good side, there's a community as well, and so you're more likely to be tapped into, hey, are you okay? Because you're a part of a community. But the flip side is, because you're a part of a community, you may feel shamed into not getting help because what would they think? And so I would talk to people my first year of residency, and I would think we had a plan, and that they were going to do it, and it was a great plan. And we'd come back 3 months later, and they'd never taken the medicine. And they'd say, well, I talked to my Sunday school teacher, my pastor, some person who was influential in faith who told me I shouldn't do that. Well, then I started talking to the pastors, like, oh, no, we're not talking about that. We're not telling people not to take their medicine. So then I do a study, a 3-month study. And you know as well as I do, when your boss is around, you behave better. Well, this was a study where I looked at sermons that were televised, and I listened to what they were saying about mental illness. And do you know what? The pastors were telling me the truth. They were not talking about mental illness. But let me tell you what they were talking about. They were talking about emotional wellness. They were talking about peace. So psychiatrists, we talk about the absence of depression. People of faith talk about joy. Psychiatrists, we talk about the absence of anxiety. People of faith talk about peace. So there was a different language, but here's the thing that happened. Sometimes they would say something along the lines of, in the presence of God, there's fullness of joy. So in the presence of God, there's fullness of joy. So if I don't have joy and I'm depressed, what do I hear? That's not what they said, but what do I hear? How do I interpret that? Be anxious and sin not. So if I'm anxious, does that mean I'm sinning? Now, out of the 3 months that I did this, I normally don't tell you the names, and I probably am not going to be able to tell you the names because I can't remember the names, but I was going to tell you if I could remember. A guy out of San Antonio, Texas, said it was sin to have anxiety. That was one guy. And a guy out of California said the only way you should be depressed is if you were a new believer. Very huge ministry. Fred Price was his name. Hagee, I think was the guy that said, John Hagee. So those two individuals, and you might say, well, it's just two people. Those two individuals are broadcast around the world. They have very huge congregations. We're having services multiple times a day. And they were broadcast all over the nation, all over the world, really. And so those statements, though it was just two guys, but it was two guys with a heck of a lot of reach. And if I heard that, and I don't have anyone to counter that, now my panic attack feels like sin. My worry feels like sin. And nobody said, hey, you can be anxious because you have a thyroid condition or because your diabetes is uncontrolled. They don't even realize that, but they feel like sin. And so there's some good things that can happen with it. But when someone that you love thinks it's bad, and I'll even talk about myself, I got on medicine after my mom died. And my brother, whom I love, told my pastor, who was actually just here, he said something equivalent to, Ron is on that stuff. It was, I think I think it was an antidepressant, and you would have thought it was crack. Okay, I felt like I had gone into the alley and got it from a dealer or something. Okay, and so I felt better, but I felt worse because I felt judged, and so I came off the medicine and I started doing worse. I got back on the medicine and I started doing better. Came off the medicine and I started doing worse, and I was just like, you knuckleheads are going to have to learn to love me with medicine because otherwise I might curse somebody out. I didn't say that to them, but I thought it, you know? And so we are definitely, we want to be affirmed. We want to be embraced by our community. And if our community does not embrace that, you know?
I love that, and thank you for making it personal, because a lot of times when we talk to professionals and professionals talk to us, we feel like that they cannot relate to us, even though they're spouting off all the medical terminology and the thus and so. We feel like they can't relate to us because we're the patient and you're the medical professional. And so with that, talk a little bit about the cultural significance and how one's culture plays into the treatment or the acknowledgement of emotional, social, and mental health.
Yes. I don't know where to start with that because that's such a vast question. I can say, as an African American, there are only 5% of African Americans are psychiatrists. I think maybe 2% of the psychiatrists, or 5% of blacks are psychiatrists. And so we're disproportionately represented in psychiatry. And people say, well, it doesn't matter if you see a black psychiatrist or a Latino doc or a Hispanic doc. But I remember when I was living in Los Angeles and I had a doctor, and I felt like he owed me after the visit because I felt like I was doing so much explaining of what I was talking about, of my language, and I don't use a lot of slang, but just like my regular language that I would just be using regularly, I would have to explain. And what happens in my community, I felt like I had to sometimes cover my community because, like, even though he didn't say anything, sometimes it would be like, you could see when judgments are happening even if they aren't expressed. And so I felt like I couldn't, if the little bit that I was dropping was landing like that, I had to cover my, the other people that I was dealing with. And I'll give you an example. A therapist that I was seeing, I was treating her, and I was asking how she came to me. And she had been being followed by another therapist. And when the therapist found out that her son's father wasn't in his life, the therapist immediately said, oh, is he in jail? And she was very hurt, disappointed, and angry at the assumption that was made. And so as I listened to her, I realized that my experience was not any different than hers. She felt the need to protect the black men in her life as I did, because we felt that our loved ones were being judged unfairly, even just unfairly. There were some internal biases that people didn't realize they had, but when they show up when you're at your most vulnerable, your weakest, then it was like, I gotta see somebody that looks like me, because I don't want to, the therapeutic process involves you being able to be transparent and vulnerable. And if you are feeling guarded and defensive, then you are not going to get the most out of therapy.
And speaking of getting the most out of therapy, full transparency, Dr. Maddox is one of my bosses. And so she's one of my bosses. And oftentimes she will say that everyone needs a therapist, whether you're having a good day, a bad day, or an indifferent day. Everyone needs a therapist. And so, Dr. Maddox, talk a little bit about what brought you to that conclusion that everyone needs a therapist regardless of where you are in your life.
Yeah, I am not her boss. She bosses me around. Now, I may hold something that she thinks of as a title, but she bosses me around. Now, I say that because many times we go seek out a therapist when we're at rock bottom, when we're vulnerable, when we're not thinking clearly, when we're hurt. And it can take 2 or 3 months to get in to see somebody, and then you are not interviewing them to see if you're a good fit. You're just taking the first person that's open. I, on the other hand, think that you should before you go to a doc, you check the doc out. Before you put your kids in a school, you check the school out, you look at the statistics, you do that. And so when you're going to be sharing your heart, your secrets, the things that touch you the most, why wouldn't you want to check out people and see who's who and what's what? And so I think that it is helpful for you to identify someone that is a good fit for you while you're not at rock bottom, so that when you start to shift, they can see that your pattern is shifting, that your demeanor is shifting, those kinds of things. And on top of that, I think that many times, particularly in the South, we say, I don't need anybody but the Lord, or I'm going to go do retail therapy, or I'm going to hang out with my friends and we're going to go on vacation. And so we say that. But how many of you still have the same best friend from childhood in here?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have a few hands raised. But how many of you have been on Facebook and you see people who used to be friends or used to be married or used to be whatever, and they are slandering the person on Facebook? And so I say, you get what you pay for, and you are paying for confidentiality, you are paying for experience, you're paying for expertise, and you're paying for some of my education, okay? So that part. But at least every 3 or 4 months, there's something that's going to happen. You're going to be grieving the loss of somebody. You and your partner have had a knockdown, drag out, heated, intense fellowship. You and your
fellowship. Okay.
Intense fellowship.
Yes, it was an intense fellowship.
That's what I call my husband.
Okay.
When my husband and I have arguments, intense fellowship. We had intense fellowship.
Yes,
and maybe you're having a struggle at work. You're trying to make a decision about whether you should go to this job or whatever. And if you reach out to your mom, as loving as she is, she's going to think, well, I don't want you moving across the world to Miami. I think you should stay. Or your friend is going to say, well, that man takes up all of your time. Ditch him. So they're not going to be unbiased. They're going to think about how your decision impacts them, and that's how they're going to weigh in. When you get a therapist, you have someone who's thinking about you exclusively and giving you feedback based on expertise, experience, patterns, what have you. And it's just about you. It's not about all of that. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great thing.
Well, speaking of being a great thing, and you are the world's most beloved psychiatrist.
I paid her to say that.
The world's most beloved psychiatrist. Let's back up a little bit. 4 years ago, when we were in the height of COVID, everyone was at home, and everyone was ripped off the Band-Aid of mental health, particularly as it relates to African American communities, because everyone experienced isolationism and all the things that go with that. And fast forward to today, lots of people still are not comfortable with being in large groups, not comfortable with going to the doctor because it's out in public. So talk a bit, if you will, about the role of virtual access to a therapist, the pros, the cons, and everything in between.
In full transparency, I've been doing telehealth since 2006. Before it was sexy.
Before, yes.
Before it was reimbursed. I started that as a fellow with veteran populations in rural Arkansas. And if you Google my name in depression studies, in 2010, 2013, we were doing publications about the safety of telehealth compared to traditional medicine way back when. Before the pandemic hit, I was already nearly exclusively virtual, except I went into the office one day a month just because I needed to get out the house, okay? So that was something that I was already doing, but it wasn't something, I was doing it on research basis, and it wasn't being reimbursed. The beauty of COVID, if there's such a thing, one of the unintended perks of COVID is that insurance companies got on board with paying, and my no-show rates decreased because people with anxiety don't want to go to the doctor. And so it was great for my anxious patients who didn't want to be around other people, and they didn't have to worry about it. It was also great for my people in small communities who were concerned about who would see them. I think one of the Kennedy boys who's still alive, who used to be U.S. rep, we share the stage, and one of the stories that he shared was he would park his car about 2 blocks away, and he would walk to a psychiatrist's office, and he would book 2 appointments, and he'd come to the next one because he didn't want anybody in the office. So he was concerned about who was going to see him. With telehealth, there's nobody in the office. There's nobody looking at your car. You don't have to worry about that. And the other thing that happened during COVID was that people started coming out. Former First Lady Michelle Obama said, I had a little bit of depression. The former Duchess Meghan Markle said, I thought about suicide while I was pregnant. And so different people who were highly regarded or well known started talking about their depression, and it became okay to not be okay. But the beautiful thing was that insurance companies started paying for telehealth. And so I would have my practice look like the who's who of Arkansas. I had judges, I had sheriffs, I had legislators, mayors, I had doctors, therapists. That is what I had senators calling me for their family members. My clientele went to who's who of society. I had probably only had 2 teachers in the 20 years that I was practicing. I had teachers galore, you know. And so regular, ordinary people who were considered the superheroes in their community had no more bandwidth to be the superhero. And so all of us in this room are probably the people that folks pick up the phone and call. Well, after we've lost this person, and before we finish grieving that person, this person died. And so we didn't have the capacity to hear what other people had to say. And when my phone would ring, I would look at it and try to decipher if I should answer. And I say, oh, yes, this is a happy person. This is going to be a good call. And then on the other end of the phone was not a good call. It was work. It was tears. So I didn't want to answer my phone anymore because I was like, I don't have capacity for me and this and this and this and this and this and this. I didn't want to answer my phone anymore. I was like, listen, book an appointment with me when I'm expecting it, but don't call me at 9 o'clock anymore. I just can't. I just couldn't.
Hey, I understand that. And as the world's most beloved psychiatrist, it's important to set boundaries, and you did that. And thank you for doing that. You mentioned, you know, the superheroes who were calling you, blowing your phone up. And that got me to thinking, what impact do you think that these superheroes have had on the general population being able to come forth and say, oh, you know, Michelle Obama experienced depression, maybe I can go ahead and you know, express the fact that I too am suffering from anxiety or depression. Have you seen any correlation between the superheroes coming out?
I will say, I don't know if it was the superheroes coming out or we were just too exhausted to fake it anymore. Like we didn't have the capacity to pretend. Like it is exhausting to pretend that you're okay when you're not okay. And so I think that we just didn't have the capacity. I remember during the pandemic, my brother sent me a text, and it was just, hey, sis, how you doing? Now, understand this. My brother does not respond to phone calls. He doesn't text. So if I call him 7 times, he'll say, oh, this is serious. Let me call her back. So he's not the person who does any checking. And so when he sent that, if you had sent that, my perfunctory response would have been, I'm good. But because it was my brother, and I thought about it, and the tears just started rolling because we were a month into the pandemic, and I was helping everyone else, and I was putting out fires, and I was holding hands, and I was connecting hands. But in order for me to do what I was doing, I had to not be thinking about what I was doing in order to do it. And so when I paused for just that brief moment to think about it, I was so not okay. And I couldn't stay there very long, but I had not checked in on me. I was checking in on everybody else. And so the superheroes no longer had the capacity to make it look easy. And we were too exhausted and we were overwhelmed. And the people that we would normally call and they would make us laugh, when we called, we would learn that they just lost their mom or they just lost their husband. And so our support system had evaporated overnight. And if you wanted somebody to listen to you and not tell you their Me Too story, you had to book an appointment. And when you booked an appointment, you might have a therapist that was in there trying to tell you their Me Too